Hello and welcome to our presentation on Native Americans, how they arrived into this continent, how the Europeans arrived, how that affected them, and of course the beliefs, religions that Native Americans hold, and how that influences modern day culture, where their culture can still be found, and where Native Americans can still be found.
The Native Americans first arrived in North America over 20,000 years ago. They walked by foot across the Bering Land Bridge and the Kelp Highway, which is a now underwater coast that went from Alaska and British Columbia to Washington and Oregon.
But of course, Native American arrival into U.S. civilization occurred quite in the opposite way. The first settlements occurred in the late 1500s, and disease killed up to 90% of the native population. Because of this lack of population in this vast land, European expansion would soon begin.
Mixed view on foreigners. Refused to accept European settlers. Native Americans would avoid the European settlers at all costs. Alliances. However, some European leaders formed alliances with Native American groups to fight against foreign powers.
Of course, European expansion didn't just happen because of the spread of disease. Many wars would be fought over the next 100 years, 9 of which were multi-year conflicts in just the first 44. The results were less resistance to expansion, hostile relationships, and colonial unionization, further speeding up the process of expansion. These two main reasons is what led to the ultimate result in collapse. This meant the end of tribes that had been around for thousands of years even, and in some cases, in a matter of just 70 to at maximum 150 years, had met its end due to expansion.
The Treaty of Hopewell, Treaty of Holston, Pickering Treaty, Treaty of Greenville, Treaty of Fort Wayne, and Treaty of New Echota gave Native Americans more territories to own. However, the white men oftentimes took away their rights to these lands and territories over time.
After a period of mass conflict, the U.S. found a new opponent, and that was a refugee situation. For children, it meant a complete heritage scrub, and for those old enough that hadn't been killed or captured, it meant join or die, further washing away Native American heritage because the U.S. felt threatened by it. While integration was occurring, Native Americans out west were forced to resettle. The Indian Removal Act from 1830 forced tribes west of the Mississippi River, and in 1838 thousands of federal forces had infiltrated Native confederacies that had been around for thousands of years.
And survival was based off of young girls who followed women and learned traditions such as basket making, working the fields, and cooking. Children also learned moral rules from the tribe stories that were told by the elders. The young boys learned to hunt using trapping techniques and animal patterns.
The Native Americans had to live off the land, so they did a lot of hunting. They fished using nets and spear-like sticks that were homemade, and they hunted larger animals such as bear and deer with bow and arrows. They were very good at hunting because they were sneaky and good at tracking their prey.
How religion impacts everyday life. Nature. The landscape, animals, plants, and other environmental elements play a major role in the religion of Native Americans. Strong group involvement. Native Americans believed in effective responsibility and strong group involvement to work together. Religion. Most Native Americans believed and worshipped in an all-powerful being called the Master Spirit that assumed a range of all forms and both genders. Native Americans also believed in an afterlife and that humans do live forever.
The holiday and ceremonies practiced by Native Americans are death rituals. This was a celebration to them because they believed it was the end of life on Earth, but a start of life in the spirit world. They would give the dead food, herbs, and gifts. Another celebration is the Green Corn Festival, which was a celebration of the ripening of corn. They danced and had a feast. included language barriers, which mainly meant that Native Americans did not find power in words like other cultures. They did not have a lot of small talk unless with family or friends. Another cultural difference was the view on food. They had stories that went along with foods that they ate to remind them where they came from, where settlers viewed it more as a survival than a sacred ritual. European settlers followed governmental monarchy, where Native Americans followed a tribal form of government. Another difference was the view on nature. Native Americans loved the environment and rarely stripped it of its resources, which was opposite of the settlers who cut down trees.
Birch bark homes. These homes are quite small. They're usually 10 feet tall and have a frame that is covered in birch bark. The birch bark is fastened to the wooden frame with rope. These houses were perfect for the Aliquin tribes because they often stayed in places for months at a time.
Cultural differences, clothing and housing. Clothing depended on the weather. Native Americans were one with nature, so it influenced the designs and supplies they used for clothing. They also used animal skins. They used the skins of animals that they raised or hunted to create clothing that would keep them warm. For housing, they had local villages and towns. Some Native American towns would populate 1,000 or more people, and basic villages would populate less than 500 people. It also depended on hunting. Most villages would empty during the winter months due to hunting. However, during the warmer months, they would stay at home to grow crops.
Native American reservations still exist across the United States under the BIA, or Bureau for Indian Affairs. They are not subject to federal laws, but do depend on federal government for financial stability. Over 567 individuals live on reservations, where they can still hold on to their heritage and live in a community.
This slide shows 9 significant cultural sites where Native American culture can be preserved and found today. Notice that a lot of these sites are in the southwestern United States because that area was founded later and preserved a lot better than eastern places. This slide lists resources and organizations dedicated to preserving the culture of Native Americans and indigenous people. Included among the top ones, the Native American Rights Fund, the Warrior Women Project, Sitting Bull College, and of course the Red Hawk Native American Art Council.